At the end of the day, I choose you.
Hi, welcome to Adoption Now, telling your adoption story. I'm your host, April Fallon. We are in season 8. Yay! If you're new to Adoption Now, my husband and I are the adoptive parents of 4 children. We are now on YouTube, so we're doing this on video. So if you're used to listening to this on audio, you can pop right over to YouTube and actually see the whole interview. But I just wanted to share that we love this show so much. And we started it because as we were fostering children, adopting children, I even spent 3 years in Uganda, Africa, fostering children out there. I realized that there was a lot that needed to be talked about. Sometimes people didn't understand the process or what people go through. And so that's really why we started this show. And what I didn't realize is that we were going to gain such a great and positive and encouraging and educational adoption community. And that's really what we are right now. And I personally am so grateful for all of the people who have joined together to help each other. If you're new to us, we do share stories from the perspective of adoptees, birth parents, and adoptive parents. We need to know the whole story so that we can understand how to help each other. Also, we're a nonprofit, and I want to thank everyone who has made a donation for the end of the year. We appreciate it so much. If you still want to do that, there's still time. You can go to Adoption Now podcast and select the donation button. Okay, so today we have a returning guest, and I love returning guests because once they're on the show, then the second time feels like family. Feels like we're friends and we're in this together to help children. Today we have Rita Soronen, and she's the president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. This organization works hard to find permanent families for the more than 140,000 children waiting. Rita, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me back. It's so good to see you and so good to be on the show.
Yes, last time we didn't see each other.
Oh, that's right.
Right? We were just over audio and on the phone,
right.
So it's wonderful to see your face. Okay, so we talked a little bit last time about Dave Thomas's story, that he himself was adopted, and his story is so powerful because it was just really one person in his life that forever changed his life. And he went on to start Wendy's restaurants. And I mean, he had such a successful life, but he credits that to being adopted, right?
He does. And yet his adoption story wasn't an easy one. He lost his adoptive mother. She died when he was very young. His father moved from place to place frequently, so he was frequently moving, and he was raised almost exclusively by his grandmother Minnie, and that's the person who he really credits for instilling in him values and this drive to succeed. And so it points out that having that one person, whoever it is in your life, but a permanent person that he could always count on, was so important. So yes, absolutely, he credits adoption. Even though he didn't have an easy life as a youngster, he credits adoption for his success.
I love that because it really tells us that you don't have to be a certain age to adopt, to help an older child, right?
Exactly.
Some people might say, I'm too old, it's past my time, but that's not true. You can help and change a child. Stability is so important. And oftentimes, if they just find one to connect to, that's enough to get them to go on and be able to believe in themselves and understand how to live, right? How to connect to people and how to have a flourishing life.
That's exactly it. And when you think about, particularly when we talk about adopting from foster care, the average age of a child in the US system right now is about 8. So there are very few infants that are in foster care. And there are 12-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 18-year-olds that still need that permanent family. And so when people are thinking about adopting, absolutely, age is almost irrelevant because, and particularly if you're thinking about an older child, you may have already had youngsters in your house and you don't want to do diapers again, or you don't want to do midnight feedings again. Or you may be a single parent that says, I'm much better with an older child that I can relate to at this stage in my life. So I think anyone that can commit to a child, that can think about what's best for me as well as what's best for this child, can then successfully begin to move through this notion of it doesn't have to be an infant. And we celebrate, believe me, we celebrate when infants are adopted, when any child that needs a home, that's cause for celebration. But when you think about those 108,000 children in the US system and 30,000 in the Canada system who are waiting and who tend to be older, then that's where I think we need to dispel that notion that you have to be young, you have to be married, you have to be wealthy to adopt.
Let's talk about age. At what age does it become more bleak for a child? I hate to use that word, but at what age is it like, this is going to be way harder for them?
We know from research that the day a child turns 9 in foster care and they have
9.
been freed for adoption, that their likelihood of being adopted decreases significantly. Imagine any 9-year-old that you know, and they already begin to lose hope that they're going to have a family just because they're a little bit older as a child. That's what drives us the most, that no 9-year-old, 10-year-old should think, all right, I'm just going to have to age out of foster care and do this on my own.
By 9, it just seems like they're so young still. But I think a lot of people ask me, can an older child attach? Can they come into my home and actually feel like my child?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I think people really need to think about as they're thinking about adopting. And of course, look, children in foster care are there for a reason. They've been abused or neglected or abandoned. So they already have that first layer of trauma that they've experienced. Then they've been separated from their family of origin. No matter what the circumstance is, we all identify with our family of origin. And so there's another layer of trauma. And depending on how long they're in care, they may move multiple times, or they may be rejected from a foster family and have to move to another family. Or when they move from school to school, they can't quite get settled because they know they might have to move again. So all of those layers of trauma combined with grief and loss that they feel as a result of what's happened to them can make them perhaps mistrust adults, can make them have some behaviors that they're just trying to understand who they are and where they fit. And it can come out in negative, what we perceive as negative behaviors, when they're really trauma-based behaviors. So yes, it may be tough at first for them to connect to an adult until they build a sense of trust, until they believe they're not going to be kicked out again. They're not going to have to move again. They may not have to change their name. They're not going to be abused again. It takes a while for that trust to develop, of course, given all that they've been through. But given that, and with a family that has support around them, a supportive network, every child can fit in a permanent family. Absolutely.
What do you say to people when they say, I want to start the process? Because it's easy to say, okay, that's great, and you can change a life. But then also there's the side of being realistic, right? And so we always say on the show, it's like a fine line of educating and not scaring the person, right? And encouraging them, but not being unrealistic and delusional about how hard it might be. What is your advice on to tell somebody who is looking to start the process?
It's such a good question. And I think it's come in with eyes wide open, but come in with your heart wide open too. So it's both, it's the emotion and the intellect have to be working in sync the entire time. Because first of all, if you're adopting from the foster care system, you're dealing with a government system. You might be dealing with a private agency, but that private agency only has access through a government system. And so there can be challenges about return phone calls or even getting through to somebody when you just want to get information. So be persistent. Do research about organizations in your area. What's the situation in my community? Do I need to reach out to a private organization, or do I need to reach out to the county children's services organization? And then really begin to understand, what are the steps? And the first step is a deep sort of self-analysis. What do I want in bringing a child into my home that has been in the foster care system? Do I want to have a sibling group? Am I willing to take a child that might have special needs? Do I have an age range that's non-negotiable for me? And that's okay to say that. I'd prefer a school-age child, or I'd prefer a teenager, or if at all possible, I'd prefer, baby to toddler. You can make those wishes known. It may take longer for that baby to toddler stage, but
Mhm.
understand what's going to be best for you, because that's going to be what's best for the child. And then understand what the agency requires you to do, because there are some steps that a new potential parent needs to go through. Do I need to foster first and then adopt? Some agencies prefer that you become a foster parent so that you can understand all the ins and outs of what happens in this foster care system, and where the resources are, and how to work with my social worker and the courts and all of those institutions that I'm going to be confronted with through fostering. But many don't make you do that. You can come in as a potential adoptive parent. Either way, you're going to need to go through some specified classes. And it can feel fairly rigorous if you're working full time and you're doing those classes at night once a month or a couple of times a month. But they're critical, because that's where you'll learn about the dynamics of abuse and neglect, the dynamics of grief and loss, of trauma, of who these children are and why they're there, and begin to dispel some of the myths and misperceptions that surround them. And once you've gone through that and you've expressed to your social worker, here's the age range, here's if I do want a sibling group, am I open to a biracial or interracial adoption, or do I want a child of a certain race? None of that can be guaranteed, but your wishes can certainly be expressed. And you have the right to say, this probably isn't the child for me at the front end, because we don't want that to happen after a point of placement.
Right, right.
And then they'll begin to look at, where is a match for this family, and who is this child that might be best for the family, but more important, where is the family that's best for this child, that can meet this child's needs in the best
Mhm.
possible way. And once a child or children are identified, they'll be placed in your home for a period of time, just making sure that everything works in the way that everyone hopes it will. And then after that sort of waiting period, most states have, I think, about a 6-month waiting period. Then it'll move toward a finalization in the courtroom, when this family becomes a legal family, as if that child had been born to them. So I think it's equally important that a potential adoptive parent understand, this child, you can't think of this as, well, you know what, this didn't work out, so I probably should give the child back. They're used to the system. That cannot happen to that child. We can't put
Mhm.
that child through that trauma again of being rejected. So it's a series of steps. It can seem at times burdensome or overwhelming, but I think the more that you do your upfront research, ask to be connected to other adoptive families so that you can talk about their experience, get connected to a network if the agency offers them, of a group of adoptive or foster parents, so you can begin to
Mhm.
build that network around you that understands what you're doing, and look to your existing network, your family, your faith community, your place of employment. Can you build that supportive network around you too, and have them understand why you're doing this, and how can they be supportive of this amazing step that you're taking, but that takes perhaps the same kind of work that when a baby's born, you hope everybody surrounds you
Mhm.
with help and dinners and advice on how to take care of this new baby.
But at some point, it feels like that could end, right? Everybody's excited when you get the child or the baby, but your organization has post placement resources. Let's talk about that.
Look, in all honesty, again, these are children that have experienced so much in their young lives that it might be fine for 6 months or a year, and then they begin expressing doubts or fears, or evidence of perhaps depression, or questioning or acting out behaviors, because certain points can trigger that trauma again in them,
Mhm.
particularly when they finally feel safe. Then they can express perhaps some inner feelings they haven't been able to express. So it's critically important for every adoptive family, whether they come through the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, Wendy's Wonderful Kids
Yes.
program, or any other program, that before that adoption finalizes, or even better than that, while they're going through this process of learning from the agency, help me understand, where are your post adoption resources? How do I get connected to those before I finalize my adoption? So that once I finalize that adoption, if I need counseling, if my child needs therapy, if I just need a network of folks to begin to talk to, here's what's happening in our family, what's happening in yours, get connected to those resources immediately. sometimes families feel like they've failed if suddenly something starts happening and they think, well, I should be able to handle this. Why can't I handle this? And that tension begins to mount between parent and
Mm-hmm.
child. And they think as adults, perhaps they've failed somehow. To the contrary, asking for help is a sign of success. Help me make sure that this child and I can continue to thrive in the environment that we're both in. So yes, we've begun to build a robust connection with agencies that provide credible and valuable post-adoption resources for families who do adopt.
I think that is so important. I think it's really important to recognize that you are getting involved in a child's life that needs healing. And that's a lot different than biological children. And I think often people say, hey, what's one more? I'll add them to the gang. I have room, I have love, I have even finances. But a lot of times those things aren't what the child needs. And so what you are committing to is the healing for a child. And that looks different. And you have to find a community of people, like you said, that understand that. And I have one little bit of advice for you as well. It is important you find a community that is solution based. Noah and I have gotten involved in groups. And yes, do they understand where we're coming from? Can we all gather around and talk about how hard this is? Absolutely. And you need people to understand you. But if you have no solutions, then you're only getting together to bring your problems to the table. And that's not enough for the child. You might feel better as you walk out, but the child needs solutions. We have to find the right doctors and therapists, and the triggers, you have to be aware of them as the mom, right? As the dad. You are looking out for that child. You're talking through things, and you recognize that this is a commitment to helping this child just become healthy and really, really being an instrument in their healing. If you're committed to that and you understand that that can be really hard, especially as the safe parent, then I think already you have an advantage. You're going into it in the right mindset that you want to be a part of life-changing healing. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely, and you said it brilliantly. I don't have anything to add to that other than
Well, we
it's
can
a
end the interview.
it's a lifelong process, and think about if let's imagine you adopt a child at age 9, but they've been in foster care for 4 or 5 years before that. There may be a point in their adolescence when everything else that an adolescent is going through, of course, defiance and challenge and learning and craziness that the hormones and their brain is still developing. Now add to that layers of trauma, and you may
Mm-hmm.
see things in adolescence that are sort of teenager activities on steroids. And at that point, as Americans, we're not real fond of teenagers to begin with, but you begin to see acting out behaviors and you think, okay, now what do I do? So it's critically important to have, for example, we provide a grant to an organization that is training across the nation therapists to be adoption competent. It's one thing to grant a
Yes.
therapist, but they have to understand this dynamic of adoption, foster
Mm-hmm.
care adoption, grief, and loss. Otherwise, it's like going to a podiatrist for a heart issue. You need to get a therapist that understands. So do that research again ahead of time so that
Mm-hmm.
when perhaps you have an adolescent that's going through maybe some challenges you hadn't anticipated, you've got someone that can immediately begin to help you with that. So yes, you said it brilliantly.
Yes, I agree with this too. Adoption competent. We talk about that a lot. I also talk about pediatricians that understand trauma.
Yeah.
I say this when families bring home children that have been exposed, that they kind of want to be like, this is great. Everything's great. Pediatrician says they're great. Go to an NAS pediatrician. Go to one that understands what they're looking for your child. This is not so that you can go there and the pediatrician can be negative or the counselor can be negative. This is so that you can get help early. They see it earlier because they know what they're looking for. I emphasize this all the time, but it's so important that you get the right professionals, not only a professional, and maybe your 3 other children that you have at home that are your biological children, they did great with these counselors or pediatricians. This is different. And I just want to emphasize that because, like you said, in the world we live today, we don't like teenagers. That's so funny that you said that. I love teenagers. I'm
Me
just not
too.
sure that I'm going to love mine. because mine are a little bit difficult when they live with you. But yes, it's hard when you live day in and day out with all of these different emotions and all these things going on. And I think it's hard because often people want to paint a really wonderful, perfect picture. And let's throw that away for a second because that doesn't matter. That's about us wanting something for ourselves, right? And this is not about us. This is about the child. And I feel like sometimes even with my kids, and I'm in the adoption community, your child will do something at church and you're like, oh my gosh, what is everybody going to think about me? That doesn't matter. Go around your community because they get it. They understand. And they know that trauma looks different for so many different children. And this isn't your fault. You're not failing. You are just trying to figure out the answer for help. And I think that is really, really important. And you have a really great story to tell us about a family that adopted. But I want to say that I watched the video because they have a YouTube video that we will post. I watched it with my little girl who's 7 and she's African American. And she loved this video. It just touched her heart so much that there would be children asking for parents and not getting them, that they would be waiting and waiting. Like that concept to this little 7-year-old was so massive. And so she was so happy to see that she got a family. And you're going to tell us all about her, but you have to watch the video because it's so heartwarming.
I love that. And it is about for kids, about a sense of justice, right? Children have an innate sense of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see that for some reason another child isn't able to experience that, it impacts them greatly. It's so sweet to hear that from your daughter. Yeah, this is the story of Marisol. And it's, she had a grueling life to begin with. She lived in a home that had a lot of substances available. And at about age 4, her mother had another baby, but mom was out at night frequently, and left the 5-year-old, when she was 4 or 5, left Marisol to care for this infant. So she was essentially put in a mothering position at age 5. Can you imagine changing diapers, giving her a bath? Not only the risks that could happen there, but just this inordinate sense of responsibility for this little person. Well, at that same time, then the agency became aware that this was happening, took her and put her in foster care. From age 5 to 12, she was in foster care. No one came, and she had been freed for adoption. No one came forward to say, Marisol looks like the child for my family. I look like the family for Marisol. At age 12, she went into group homes and stayed in group homes until she was 18. So from 5 to 18, nearly 14 years, she was in foster care when someone should have been advocating on her behalf to move her into a permanent home. Because as she grew, and you'll see this in the video, she kept thinking, well, okay, I'm just never going to be adopted. No one wants me. No one cares enough to help me find a family, until the foundation's Wendy's Wonderful Kids program came along. And within a very short period of time, at age 18, she was placed with a family that had stepped up to just become a resource family for her, sort of a mentoring family, and grew to love her. And so this match then turned into an adoptive family, and she was adopted at age 19. She's a brilliant singer. She loves to sing. She didn't believe that she was going to go anywhere. She graduated from high school. She learned how to, she got her driver's license. She's headed toward college, and she just has this lovely singing voice. And now she sings with joy rather than with maybe a sense of melancholy about, okay, I'm in this world on my own. It's just an amazing story of what's possible, but also that there is hope in this, what can be a bleak picture of children who suffer in their families of origin or suffer in foster care. But we all have an answer to that. If you can't adopt or foster, you can learn about it. You can help elevate this conversation on social media. You can volunteer with organizations. You can donate to organizations like yours. You can do what you can, and every bit helps to make sure children like Marisol never have to go through 14 years, 15 years of thinking they're unwanted, that they're just, sitting and waiting for something to happen, rather than being filled with the joy of life and all of the possibilities that exist.
I love that you said that. Everyone can do something. And I think it's really important to say that, we are in the church community, and often it's kind of put in a box like, oh, these people do foster care. These people are adopted. But everybody can do something. You can give, you can help, you can make a meal, you can support the family if they need resources like clothes, even something simple like going and buying a family shoes. Little things will change a family's life. I want to talk about the mentoring families. If somebody's listening and they say, I don't know, it's a big step for me to just say yes to foster care, but how can I become a mentoring family?
Yeah, check with your local organization, depending on where you are, and ask about, help me understand. Do you have an opportunity for me to help mentor a child, to be a guide for a child, sort of a big brother, big sister situation that I will be I'll be a trusting, caring adult in this child's life. That may even if the child gets adopted, that doesn't mean that I can't stay connected to that child. Hopefully, I can, but someone that can help guide them along in a way that they're not getting perhaps just from living in a group home, for heaven's sakes, and seeing their social worker once a month and having people come in and out of their lives, but no one that's a steady guidepost for them, a guardrail, someone that can, and just have fun with them, help them with
Mhm.
school issues, help them with life issues, particularly if it's a young lady that's turning into her teens and going through all of the things that young ladies go through in school or dating or whatever it is, and all the restrictions that foster care bring to a youth in care. It's not a normal life, but someone like a mentor or a resource family can help them understand what family is all about and what a trusting adult is all about.
If somebody wants to get involved with Wendy's Wonderful Kids, how can they do that?
Sure. We've got all kinds of information on our website, davethomasfoundation.org, or they can call their local child welfare agency or adoption agency. We're not in every agency, but we're in a lot in all 50 states. And they can say, hey, do you have a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter? I'm thinking about adopting or fostering. I'd like to get connected with that recruiter because I know they understand these children's issues. If they're interested in, for example, if they're a social worker and they want to become a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter, once again, call your local adoption agency and see if they have any openings, because we don't hire them. We give funds to the organizations that then hire them and see. But we've got a list of the states and the organizations that are a part of the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program on the website, and they can connect that way. If they just want to support it, like you, are a nonprofit, and we're always delighted when people think that it's worth their time and talent and energy and funds to support a program like Wendy's Wonderful Kids.
Rita, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I love having you on the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing, the education that you do. And I love that it's the real point of view. Of course, this is a phenomenal, joyous effort to adopt, but it's one that's based in reality. And I love that you do all of that.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
The Adoption Now podcast has been telling adoption stories for nearly a decade, and now's the time to dig a little deeper. Looking for behind-the-scenes content, bonus time with the Fallon family, a network of hundreds of others in the adoption triad, and a chance to influence the content you hear on the show? Join the Patreon community at patreon.com/adoptionnow. Did you know that we also offer one-on-one coaching sessions? Let us help you navigate the early steps or support you post-placement by joining the interest list on our website. And did this episode make an impact on you? Don't forget to share some love. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Adoption Now. See you next episode.
At the end of the day, I choose you.